For Sustainable Economies Law Center, though, between law school and starting there, I also was an apprentice at the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems here at UC Santa Cruz. So that's my farming cred is 6 months of training. Not all that much. Yeah, I've seen a lot of films like this, and I think all of them at the end, this one at least touched on cooperatives, which I'm glad, kind of set the stage for us. But I always sort of end even with that feeling this sense of, you know, real, sort of like a real reality check. A lot of these films are, I think, trying to be hopeful in the end, and are showcasing a lot of examples of people succeeding, but at the what I see, sort of looking at the realm of sort of policy and the way that that impacts the economic system, is that it's really difficult to imagine what a more sustainable, more just food system looks like still. And so I really liked the what Mark said about co-ops being sort of upstream to the American economy, the American way of life. But I also like to think of us as salmon. We're in California. That we were meant to swim upstream. And each of us are salmon and can do that, but the policy and sort of the law that set the stage for like how we're able, what the current is going to feel like, how many sort of little waterfalls we're going to have to jump over, whether there are predators in the water with us. Maybe I'm taking this analogy too far. But that's the realm that I work in, is sort of like, what does that ecosystem look like? Does it either support our sort of swimming upstream, or does it make it harder? And so the work that we do, we provide legal education, we do legal research, engage in policy advocacy, do some direct legal services, are all sort of in service of creating more opportunities, removing barriers to a more cooperative economy. And I happen to work in our food and farm program, and my focus is increasingly on two main issues, which is all around ownership. So worker ownership of farms and food businesses, and then cooperative ownership over land. And essentially it's to, you know, the goal for our organization is to democratize the economy, and cooperatives are an essential way for us to actually integrate democracy into our everyday life. And instead of, you know, just voting, we actually are making decisions together and sharing in ownership. And our democracy was based on ownership when it was first started, and so it's important to sort of keep that in mind for me in the work that I do. So what was I going to talk about? I guess I've heard a couple things about sort of collectives versus cooperatives, so I just want to share a little bit about the difference in cooperatives as a legal structure and cooperatives as a governance structure. And I think it's important to distinguish between the two, and maybe Luis, you can speak to this as well, is that, you know, you can form as a cooperative legal entity in California and every state, and that bakes in certain principles to how you're supposed to operate. But that's not the only way to cooperate or to share ownership. You can also form a business and integrate those cooperative principles into your business through the documents that you create to define how you govern yourselves and how you operate your business. And I think, you know, there's the Rochelle principles. There are a lot of different sort of values that are inculcated in what it means to be a cooperative. And what's great about the legal structure is that it's already in there. And so it sort of creates a stronger sort of, I guess, carrier for those values going forward. And some of the work that we've done is around sort of making those legal statutes that allow you to create cooperatives more beneficial to worker-owned businesses. They were created mostly to support consumer cooperatives, like food co-ops and REI and things like that. And so there were some tweaks that we've made to make it more useful to businesses that want to be worker-owned. which are not that many in the agricultural sector. I mean, co-ops are really, the history of co-ops is in agriculture in the United States. And they were always formed not because they were easy, because they had to be formed, because people had to share resources in order to survive, in order to thrive. And so I think what I'm really excited about is, even though there aren't very many examples of worker-owned farms, I'm excited about developing and sort of seeing what the needs are unique to agriculture that will allow worker-owned farms to flourish. There are a lot of examples in other industries, and they're growing. And so I'm yet to be convinced that they won't work in agriculture. I definitely am aware of how difficult it might be, but I think for some of the same reasons why individual farming is so difficult, that cooperatives can actually make some of those shared risks rather than individual risks, which I think is what cooperative farming is, and cooperatives are all about. So I think it's important to maybe just share some of what the conditions for success are, and it depends on whether the co-op is in startup phase or whether it's businesses transitioning. I think the succession sort of crisis in agriculture really opens up an opportunity to talk about co-ops as a strategy for succession planning. Most farmers don't have identified successors. Many people, their children are not going to go into farming, but they have long-time farm workers who have been with them for a long time, who know the business, who have the skills. And so selling to workers is a strategy that people are using in other industries, and that there are a lot of reasons why it makes sense that that could be adopted to be able to try to go through this process. And particularly maybe sort of phasing out the buyout of the business to allow the workers to be able to afford that business and set them up for success once the owner is bought out. And converting doesn't mean the owner has to leave. There's different models for converting that include owners staying on as worker members or as a retirement strategy. So there's a good resource in the back that folks have put out that if people are interested in conversions, by an organization called Project Equity that focuses on converting businesses to cooperatives. That really lays out a bunch of case studies that I think are really interesting. And the last thing I'll say is I think another sort of like key insight is that cooperatives don't operate best as sort of islands in the economy. They operate best as part of a landscape of many different kinds of supportive businesses. And the places where cooperatives are flourishing most have cooperative funders, lenders, have technical service providers that are also cooperatives, support and buy from other businesses that are also organized as co-ops. And I just read about a new co-op in Minnesota that is a cooperative providing healthcare to farmers in the state. And so farmers join. Healthcare is one of the biggest costs that people have who run their own businesses, who otherwise, don't get it from their employers, because that's the plan that we have. And so it's really those kinds of sort of innovative, cooperative supporting businesses that create the conditions for this kind of model to succeed. It's not built to succeed just on its own. So I think that'll be an interesting challenge going forward to see whether or not we can support the development of more of these kinds of businesses. Who are the other players who are, whether it's service providers like us, or whether it's lenders, or whether it's cooperative incubation funds. All of those pieces are right now, there aren't that many incentives sort of in our law and policy to support the generation of those kinds of entities. And so part of our work is to try to sort of tip the scales in policy to support and to incentivize cooperative-focused service provision and other kinds of entities because they have sort of been working from a disadvantage. And so we want to see them, have sort of the same opportunities and maybe more so to be able to develop because of the sort of co-benefits that come with organizing as a co-op, the concern for the cooperative members, the concern for the community that are sort of baked into that model. So I guess I'll stop there for now, but I'm happy to take questions. I guess one thing that I wanted to mention that a colleague asked us to share, formerly of California Center for Cooperative Development, Mai Nguyen. National Young Farmers Coalition was mentioned in the film. Mai is the recent California organizer. So if anybody's interested in learning more about the National Young Farmers Coalition, or if you're interested in starting a chapter, would be remiss not to mention that you should reach out. And there's a sign-up sheet in the back if you want to learn more about them. What she's doing right now is building a policy platform that's informed by young farmers to meet some of the same ends, to ensure that young farmers are heard in the state capitol. And so there are some listening sessions that are happening. There's a young farmer survey that you can take online. It's in English and in Spanish. So I really encourage, if you know of young farmers, and young, I think they're calling up until 40. Apologies to the 41-year-olds. To tell people about it, to take the survey, to inform kind of what that policy platform will look like, so that they are advocating for what people actually need.